There's still time to join us in the next round of our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. Classes start in January of 2026 and registration is officially open. Apply now over at fertilityfriday.com/famlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 605. I can hardly believe that 2025 is almost over. What an incredible year it has been. And there's been several important milestones for Fertility Friday this year that I want to mention, one of which is that we've hit our 11th year of podcasting officially, and we have crossed our 600th episode. We've had over 5 million downloads over the years. So I think the end of the year for me is always a time of reflection, because also the end of the year was when I first started the podcast in 2014. So it is officially that anniversary point. The first episodes dropped, I think, in December, potentially, of 2014. I have to double check that. It was either November or December. But either way, this time of year is always the anniversary point for me where I take some time to reflect. And there are so many different topics that we covered in the 2025 year. As a podcaster, I'm intimately aware that there are 52 weeks in every year. So every year I'm releasing 52 episodes, and I plan in advance which topics I'm going to be talking about and which guests I'm going to have on and the different themes that are going to kind of arise over the year. So I wanted to take a moment and share my top 10 takeaways from this year. I went back and had a look at the different episodes that we've been covering. I've released many new FAM research series episodes this year. I obviously love diving into the research and sharing it with you. These episodes often spark discussion on the same research papers that I'm covering on the paper within our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship. So I know that our community appreciates the focus on research. And ultimately, when I think about the role of the podcast and how it has changed over the years, I mean, when I first started it, the goal was to share information and awareness so that women could learn more about charting, cycle charting, and really understand how their bodies work. And I feel like that has been a theme throughout the 11 years of podcasting. And what keeps me interested after all these years, a big part of it is the research, to be able to dive in even deeper into what new studies are being done, what different topics are being addressed, and how are they being addressed? And of course, are women being served? So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my top 10 takeaways from this year in podcasting, the 2025 podcast year. So the first takeaway is nothing new. It's the theme. This is like on brand, but that your menstrual cycle is your most powerful diagnostic tool. Now, I'm sure that there are people that might disagree that the menstrual cycle is the most powerful diagnostic tool, but given that this has been my career for the past 2 decades, I would argue that it is. And one of the reasons I would argue that it's the most powerful tool is because of how unique it is, because of how personalized it is. At the end of the day, no two women have the same menstrual cycle, let alone the menstrual cycle chart. And there's no other tool that I have seen that gives you such intimate, real-time data that's specific to you on a regular basis for such a relatively low cost. I mean, just tracking your cervical fluid, tracking your basal body temperature, and understanding how these signs relate to your health can just be a complete game changer. And I've seen it change lives in many different ways, from just understanding better what's actually going on. You're no longer gaslightable because you can clearly see, you clearly have the data, from something as simple as that to something more significant. You know, how many women that I've worked with over the years who had the regular spotting or the irregular cycles or the ridiculous PMS or the out of control period pain, who were able to get a hold of it and actually have optimal normal cycles as a result of that knowledge. So it's so powerful. And the amount of women who've been able to identify some underlying issue that wasn't being addressed before and paying attention to the cycle, the power in that just simply cannot be overstated. So I would say that that's certainly a takeaway. It's always a takeaway. And the second takeaway I would say is that cervical mucus still outsmarts your apps and your algorithms and all of the different predictions. It's been really interesting this year. I've been putting out different social media content. If you're not following me on Instagram, you can find me at Fertility Friday. But it's been really fun to interact with people and see how people are engaging with the content, especially when my content goes outside of my typical audience and I get the different feedback of, is this method really working? Is it really effective? All that kind of stuff. And so with the technical age upon us, with AI upon us, that's been a pretty significant shift in the past couple of years to see just how much more engaged we are with tech. I still hold to this, that the cervical mucus is still that number one sign. It doesn't mean we can't use it alongside the tech. I mean, we can all be friends, we can all get along. But one of the things that I've shared over the years is what the research actually has to tell us. And I know this year I've shared several studies that are looking specifically at cervical mucus, that are looking specifically at apps, that are looking at their different algorithms and all of those things. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be a value in tracking your fertile signs in real time. Because you know why? The app does not know what's in your panties, right? The algorithm doesn't know if you had mucus today. It just doesn't. And so I will still stress that your cervical mucus, we could say it outsmarts all of these different tools. And while we can still play together in the sandbox, since the beginning, so even before we had these really artificially intelligent apps and all these things, I've always said that if you want the best outcomes, even if you love tech and you want to engage with it, you're going to get the best outcomes when you have a really solid foundation of knowledge. With that as your basis, then you can use any app and the app won't outsmart you, right? You need to be smarter. So you actually need to get a hold of your data. My third takeaway is that ovulation isn't optional. And I mean, this has been essentially my message throughout the many years. But from my perspective, it's not optional. It's actually foundational for lifelong health when you are a female, when you're in a female body, when you've been equipped with this hardware. Ovulation, when we disrupt it, when we suppress it, whether it's intentionally with hormones or unintentionally with some of our practices like undereating and overexercise or something like that, it really does disrupt our health. And so this is the whole reason why we can track our cycle and use it as a vital sign, because it is actually this foundational piece of women who are in reproductive age. Like when we are in that reproductive age range, ovulation is a part of the picture. It is not an optional add-on. It is not a cool feature. It's really central. And when we look at what the research has to show, the hormones are not just so that we can have children. The hormones are impacting all of the various aspects of our life, right? They're impacting our energy. They're impacting even our stress levels, impact our insulin response. I mean, all of these hormones are specifically acting together in unison, affecting our moods, affecting how we process and absorb nutrients. It's just incredible when you get into the weeds and see how deeply our bodies are impacted by estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and cortisol and all of these different hormones. So yeah, ovulation isn't optimal. We could talk about the effects that these hormones have on our bone density. We can talk about the effects that these hormones have on our metabolism, on our cardiovascular function. We could talk all day, really. But the bottom line is that healthy ovulation sets the stage for a healthy body. And then on that foundation, we can certainly look to fertility as an additional sign of health. So the fourth takeaway, of course, it has to make a little show here, hormonal birth control. I spend a lot of time talking about birth control because I feel like birth control gives us the research evidence-based kind of data point to show us what happens when we mess with our natural hormone cycle, right? So most hormonal birth control methods are either entirely suppressing ovulation or having some sort of effect on ovulation or on our hormones. And so this shows us that kind of tests. Like if we were ever curious whether or not our hormones are important for health, well, let's just find out what happens when we shut them off, right? And we talk a lot about hormonal birth control on the podcast. I've written a lot about it in my books. Fortunately, we have a ton of research on it. And even last week, we talked about the scary study about the impact that hormonal birth control has on clitoral size and volume, right? So we know that hormonal birth control has measurable effects on libido, on our vulvar tissues, on our reproductive organs, on sexual function, on fertility, potentially. We talk a lot about what the research has to say about how hormonal birth control can affect fertility, the temporary delay of return of fertility or the temporary period of subfertility post-pill. So we know these things. I mean, the question really comes like, what are we going to do about it? But we do know that hormonal contraceptives make an impact. They impact our sex drive. They impact our mood. They impact how we process and synthesize our nutrients like our B vitamins. And we know that it has a measurable impact on fertility. So I would say that continues to be an important piece of the conversation. One thing I'll say is that it was a lot more controversial to talk about hormonal contraceptives when I first started. I feel like when I first started the podcast back in 2014, when you talked about the pill, people used to come at you and, you're anti-feminist and you're going to make it so that we're not going to have access to the pill. And I used to get a lot more flack from talking about birth control. So what I think is interesting is that I think generally speaking, it's just become, because of the voices out there talking about the side effects, people can't just deny them anymore and pretend like we shouldn't be talking about it. So I do feel like we've made progress. But I would say one of the themes that has come up this year because of the different research that I've been seeing more of is certainly this kind of hyper response of the drug companies and then therefore also the research that has been coming out. So while there's been certainly an improvement in the awareness of side effects related to hormonal contraception, I think that voices like myself and others who've been putting out this information, more and more women have been bringing these questions to their physicians and their practitioners. So this has become more of a conversation. But at the same time, what has been happening is that now the medical establishment is starting to get a little bit nervous. And so they've been putting more controls on, okay, what are people talking about on social media? What are people talking about on the internet? And so they're trying to take back the conversation and take control of it again. So we are in an interesting time as far as this conversation goes about hormonal contraceptives. I feel like when I first started, I was more free. So how do I explain this? I don't think I was more or less free to talk about it, but I would say the information itself was more freely disseminated. There was no real systematic social media or internet control mechanism to kind of collectively suppress this information. So it wasn't hard to find. So women who were looking for this information could just find it. I think that's one of the big differences between then and now. I think now way more people are talking about it, but it's ironically harder to find the information because now the social media giants and the internet companies are collectively suppressing these voices. So that is something I've been talking about a lot more. I would say 2025 was kind of when I started to see this trend of these types of papers coming out. Ooh, look at these women talking about PCOS on TikTok. Ooh, why are women talking about birth control on social media? And they're kind of trying to do these damage control campaigns because the word is getting out. And ironically, I don't think they're making less money. So they're so scared that women are going to be talking about it. But at the end of the day, just because women are empowered with the knowledge and understanding of birth control doesn't mean that all women on earth are going to stop using it. I don't think the pharmaceutical companies are in danger of not making money anymore. I just think that it's important as women for us to be aware of the side effects and to be able to freely talk about it and to make choices. And if that means that more women are going to choose fertility awareness-based methods, so be it. Registration is officially open for our next round of our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Certification. Whether you've been looking for a deeper way to support your fertility clients, whether you've been looking for an opportunity to teach fertility awareness in your practice, or whether you're just ready to interpret complex charts with confidence, you'll absolutely love what we've put together for you in FAM. But don't take my word for it. Here's what Rose had to say about her experience in FAM.
If, like me, you've been thinking, this is the area I want to move into and I just want more information so that I can support clients better, then this is what the course does. It gives you this structure. It's given me the confidence to feel like I can really support women in this field, and that's sort of worth every penny, because I think as a practitioner, you always want to feel like you're doing the best you can for them. So yeah, I'd just say if that's how you're feeling and this is the area you want to be working in, then it's a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Okay, so that brings me to number 5. I think a theme that has always come up, but I do recognize that I've been talking more about some of these changes, especially in 2025, is this whole thing with undereating, stress, all of this stuff. Ultimately, when women start charting their cycles, you start to see clearly in black and white, or pink if you grab my workbook, but you start to see right in front of your face your cycle, and you see how it unfolds. And one of the first things many women notice is lower temperatures than they should be, and a shorter luteal phase, or some spotting, or delayed ovulation. We start to see what's really going on. One example that I shared on the podcast was one of our practitioners had a client whose cycles were right around that 29-day average. And so she just assumed that the client just assumed that she was ovulating around day 14, right? That's what would make logical sense. But when she actually started tracking her cycles, her ovulation was taking place closer to cycle day 21. And that would mean that her luteal phases were closer to like 9 days. And that is something that she wouldn't have understood from charting. So when we start paying attention to our cycles, we really start to see what's going on. And there's certainly a theme that I've seen emerge more and more over the past several years. And especially for women who are kind of in my age category, when we get over age 35 and we're kind of moving into our early 40s, and it becomes easier to gain weight, and we start to have some of the changes as our body is shifting ultimately towards our final period. Now, I'm not saying that we're immediately in perimenopause or that perimenopause is an illness. That's a whole other conversation. I imagine that in 2026, I'll get into more of the perimenopause conversation, but I have not totally gone off the deep end with that as of yet. But certainly, I've noticed the trend of women undereating, not necessarily intentionally, exercising a lot. And the thing about cycle charting is it exposes all of these issues. It shows you what your limitations are. It shows you how your body is actually responding to what you're doing. And so one of the themes that has arisen, I would say, in 2025, both on the podcast, so on air, and also in the background, because I spend most of my time not podcasting. Actually, I do podcasts, but I spend most of my time working with our practitioners. And so the themes that arise are simply that when you start charting, you actually see the reality of what's going on and how your body's responding. It gives you the opportunity to see, where could I improve and what could I do better? And for many, many women, it's really like you're not eating enough. It's really like, oops, you're accidentally not eating enough protein, or oops, you're working out 6 days a week. So we're going to have to make sure that you're fueling to actually give your body what it needs. That's certainly been a theme on the podcast. And in Real Food for Fertility, Lily and I devoted an entire chapter. And let me tell you, we went back and forth so much on that chapter because we really wanted to dial in what we were talking about. We really wanted to have the research to support. So if you have found yourself somewhere on what we call the HA spectrum, the hypothalamic amenorrhea spectrum, we define it in Real Food for Fertility. And we argue that you can be on the spectrum even if you're still having a period. So some women are underfueling to the point that they don't have a period anymore. But other women, they used to not have one and now they have one again, but we're still not in the optimal range because we're still having short luteal phase. We're still having significant PMS issues. We're still having maybe some premenstrual spotting. We're still having maybe a delayed ovulation. We're still having some ovulatory disruption because we haven't quite found that sweet spot. And that's where charting comes in, because we can think whatever we want, but the chart is actually what is going to show you what's really going on. As we say in Real Food for Fertility, the cycle doesn't lie. So the sixth takeaway I wanted to share is always, like I said, these are themes that are ever present, but we can't stress the importance. I can't stress really the importance more of accurate timing. So for women who are trying to conceive, it's nuanced. There's a lot that we can talk about when it comes to conception. There's a lot of different moving parts. And of course, we cover so many of them on the podcast. We talk about egg quality. We talk about AMH. We've talked about that quite a bit. But I think one of the core foundational pieces, of course, from this perspective of charting is really understanding the importance of getting the timing right. And what's interesting is that I think we can really take that for granted. So if you have been, for example, a longtime listener of the show and you've charted your own cycles for a while, I think it's easy sometimes to forget the fundamentals and the basics. And this is something that comes up a lot with our practitioners. At the very beginning of the program, many of our practitioners do have charting experience, but not all do, because that's not a requirement to join our FAM program. So we do have always a handful of practitioners who are charting for the first time. And so once you get the hang of it and you get several cycles under your belt, I think it's easy to forget how important it is to stress those basics. You can just assume people know when to time sex accurately, or assume that when your client tells you that they're doing that, that's really what's happening. But really and truly, that is not always the case. And this is, again, where charting is really important. It's important for us to have those conversations and get a general understanding of what's happening based on what our clients are telling us. But it's even more important to have them put it down on their chart and verify that what's happening is already happening. Over the course of my career, I've seen so many interesting things, from clients who are actively trying to conceive but aren't even having sex in the window, to clients who are having sex but maybe only once or twice per cycle due to a lot of different reasons. And maybe they're just doing it on day 14, right? So there's a lot of, and if anyone's newer to the podcast, ovulation doesn't always happen on day 14. So there's plenty of clients who were doing that, but maybe they ovulated on day 12 already. So that's not helping, right? So the timing is important. The basics are important, and they build the foundation. So timing is not the whole picture. There's so much more to the picture of conception, but without accurate timing, you don't have anything, because pregnancy is only possible when the sex occurs during the window. Otherwise, pregnancy is not possible. And that's why we can use fertility awareness for birth control. So on that topic, I always give a call out to male fertility. So that's going to be my point number 7. Male fertility is half of the equation. Like, I guess I'm just going to keep on this. Like, it's another one of those hills that I'm just dying on. But while I think it's important for us to focus on female fertility, and we do that actually most of the time, I do think, especially after years of working with clients who are trying to conceive, it just changes your brain when you are working with women who are charting their cycle and you see when they're having sex and you see that they're having sex at the right time. You see it. You understand the biology. You understand the science. They're doing it over and over again at the right time, and nothing is happening. At some point, you have to ask, what is going on with the sperm? So this is a huge piece that I will continue to draw attention to. And the reason that I draw attention to is just because of my experience. It's obviously not the whole issue. About 30% of the time, male fertility is a sole cause of infertility issues if there's an issue on his side. But 50% of the time, it's a contributing factor. So when, you're working with clients who are trying to conceive and it's not happening, yes, we want to be focusing on her. We want her to chart her cycles. We want to figure out what's going on. We want to identify any hormonal imbalances and apply any related protocols and all of the things. But we also have to look at him, because we have some interesting research coming out. And one of the studies I'm going to be sharing in the next few weeks is a study that literally is linking his sperm quality to your chance of miscarriage. And so we really have to have a conversation about male sperm if we're going to look at fertility, that picture as a whole. And I would also say this is one of the reasons that many practitioners jump in and join us in our fertility awareness mastery programs, because ultimately many of our practitioners have a lot of knowledge, but haven't necessarily had the opportunity to specialize in fertility in particular. So that's something to consider as well. Did you know that you can listen to Real Food for Fertility for free with your 30-day trial of Audible? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/realfood to listen now. That's fertilityfriday.com/realfood. Now, a big theme on the podcast, of course, in the 2025 year is the importance of overall cycle literacy in women's healthcare. And the more that I do this work, the more that I work with clients and practitioners, and then through our practitioners, all of our practitioners are doing practicums. So we really see a gamut of experience here. There is just a huge missing piece in our healthcare system. Without this aspect of charting that is so personalized, without the ability to actually have these conversations with your clients, to actually see in real time how their cycles are unfolding and see how that relates to their habits, their nutrition, just all of the different pieces that play a role in maintaining cycle health and hormone balance, this piece is not there. So for anybody who thinks, how important could this really be? How could cycle charting make such a difference? It's incredible what happens when we start paying attention. And I would say part of the reason that it resonates so much with me and my science minded brain is because every cycle is you're gathering very specific, nuanced data about your client. And it allows you to move from theory. And obviously, I like to be in the weeds and I like to read research papers and I like to write about them. Obviously, I love to write, and that's why I've written these books. And so it's really wonderful to live in a time where we can have access to all of this data. But the menstrual cycle makes it real because it moves away from just your ideas and your kind of protocols and what you think should be working to what is actually working for this client right now. And you don't have to guess and wonder because you can actually see how it plays out. So if you're working with a client and you see that there's an issue in their cycle and you have a protocol that you feel like is going to help them, what you find when you incorporate the charting is that, yes, some clients are going to respond to that protocol right away and you'll start to see the shifts in their cycle, and others don't necessarily respond in the same way. So in real time, you're able to adjust and really provide that personalized care in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. And also, it allows us to support our clients with issues that they're commonly, literally being either just dismissed by their providers, not taken seriously, whether it's period pain or irregular cycles or different mood shifts. We're able to see in real time and we take it seriously. This is something that is not common. If you're a practitioner, just have a conversation with your next 5 clients. Just ask them if they've ever had a negative experience with a clinician. Just ask them if they've ever gone to a practitioner with menstrual cycle issues and what the outcome was of that. Just ask. Because I know that whenever I ask, I hear variations of the same story. So all this is to say that this is a huge missing piece. Women are underserved. We know this. So what do we do about it, right? And instead of just talking, the charting allows us to have a very personalized, specialized tool, a data point that is not really being paid attention to. And I mean, maybe I'll have to do a podcast on the top 10 specific ways that it's being addressed. But I can tell you every time we have a class, there's just another example of it. Whether it's that your client was given progesterone and no direction of when to take it. So now she's on it and she probably hasn't ovulated for like 3 months because she's taking it on day 14 and she's not right. So she hasn't ovulated yet. And so therefore it's suppressing ovulation and she's wondering what's going on. Like whether it's that she was told that she's not ovulating because she was told to take a day 21 progesterone test, but she didn't ovulate until day 23, like whatever. It's constant. It's all the time. This lack of cycle knowledge is making a tangible negative difference in women's experience. And when we are dealing with women who are really struggling with whatever issue they're having, whether it's fertility related, hormone related, cycle related, pain related, whatever the case is, we need to have the tools to be able to support them. So I would say that's a huge theme. That's been a huge theme for me. And I feel like it's growing because the more and more that I am in the weeds working with our practitioners, helping them to support their clients, it just becomes more and more obvious and prevalent that this is a hole that's not being filled by our conventional medical healthcare system. Okay, so to switch gears a little bit then, my 9th takeaway is perimenopause. So while we didn't go into perimenopause a ton this year, I would just say stay tuned. It is a topic that's interesting to me. I recently turned 43, so I am certainly not there. I'm not there, but I'm on the precipice, as they would say. And for anyone who's been following for a long time, I don't just like to say stuff because I think it's interesting. I like to see what the research has to say. I like to share my client experience, real world experience. So I like to root whatever I say in what's actually going on, whether that's the scientific evidence or whether it's clinical experience. And so I have a lot of different thoughts about perimenopause and how our culture is looking at it, capitalizing on it, monetizing it. I certainly have a lot of thoughts on that. But what we've actually covered this year when we've looked at the data, I've really focused on how it plays out in the cycle. So at this stage, I haven't gone into all the weeds about all the things, but we have looked at how it plays out in the menstrual cycle. And there was a really interesting recent paper that I talked about in one of our episodes this year that looked at the cycle length variation and how it shifted. And so it looked at this massive data set and it looked at the 10 years before menopause and really looked at how the cycles are shifting and changing. Now, what we found when we are supporting our practitioners, because of course we have a perimenopause unit in the program and we support our practitioners to be able to work with women in that stage, we look at how the cycle is shifting. We look at some of the changes, what the research has to say about that. And ultimately, we can help to prepare ourselves and our clients for what to expect and anticipate, what is normal in terms of the cycle during that time. And one thought that I'll leave you with is that we are in a really interesting time where perimenopause just seems to be the buzzword. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it seems, just everyone's talking about it and everyone has a thought. And we're identifying 150 symptoms that we're calling perimenopause, as if perimenopause itself is a disease. And any woman who is over 35 that has any one of those symptoms is automatically like diagnosed with perimenopause. And then we're kind of moving into all of that. So one thing I'll just say, and a thought that I'll leave you with, is with cycle charting and understanding how cycles do shift and change, and understanding that this is a phase. It is a transition phase. We're transitioning from cycling to non-cycling over a period of about 10 years. And it is a transition phase. It is not necessarily an illness. So one thing I will say is that when you understand your body and you chart your cycles and you understand historically what has been normal for you. So for those of you who are listening who have actually charted your cycles for a period of time, whether that's 6 months, a year, or several years, or like in my case, like 20 plus years, you then can adjust a little bit easier when you start to see shifts and changes. And one thing that I will be exploring more, and one thought that I want you to consider, is that maybe every single symptom that you experience from the age of 35 onwards isn't necessarily because of this so-called illness that we call perimenopause. Because I have observed many, many clients who are within this age range who are seeing an increase in symptoms. And I'm just going to go back to the first thing. I said your menstrual cycle is your most powerful diagnostic tool. That was my first takeaway. Now, I'm not of the opinion that the menstrual cycle is supposed to be highly problematic. I have always been of the opinion that your menstrual cycle is your fifth vital sign. And if it is acting crazy, if it's going haywire, if all this stuff is going on, then it's a sign that we need to be looking deeper at underlying issues. So I've seen many clients in these perimenopause ages who have been able to restore maybe not 100% of optimal menstrual function, but certainly been able to restore 80 to 90% of normal menstrual function, despite the fact that they're in this age category, by just paying attention and really looking at what is your body saying and applying some of our different protocols. So I think, like with most things, there's going to become a need for alternative voices on this. And so at this stage, like I said, in 2025, we were focusing mostly on perimenopause and understanding how it plays out. What does the research tell us about this phase and how the cycle changes and shifts? Like what is typical, what is normal? And then that gives us a really strong foundation then to support our clients in that stage. And all I can say is that as we get older, we do see certain changes. I certainly think that we have less leeway if we're trying to abuse our bodies like we did in our 20s and not sleep and not eat properly and all the things. We're going to see much worse symptoms. But again, I don't think that as soon as we turn 35 or 40 or 45, that all of a sudden everything we've learned about the cycle goes out the window. I think that we can apply a lot of what we've learned to improve our experience as we move into those older ages. So to be continued on the perimenopause conversation. Okay, so my last takeaway just ties into everything that we've talked about. Your symptoms ultimately are your body's way of telling you that something is going on. Ultimately, that has been the theme. That's a theme of 2025, but that's also the theme of 11 years of podcasting. We really need to learn how to pay attention to our bodies. And I don't necessarily mean it in that spiritual sense of like closing your eyes and figuring this out. I mean it more in the practical sense of tracking your cycle and actually starting to understand what your body is saying to you, right? And I don't mean it. And the great thing about charting is that we can do it in a very practical way. You can literally track what is happening. You can literally track how many days your period usually is, how much bleeding you typically have, how long it takes you from the first day of your period to ovulation. You can track how many days of cervical fluid you have, and you can track your luteal phase, and you can track your symptoms. You can track any symptoms that you typically have around ovulation. You can track any symptoms that you typically have before your next period. You can track all kinds of things. And for me, this isn't just about looking at one individual cycle and as if it's a crystal ball and to be able to just tell you everything. That is part of it, but not the crystal ball thing, but the looking at one individual cycle thing. But, the bigger learning here, the bigger aspect that I always love sharing with our practitioners, that I've loved sharing on the podcast, is getting a sense of what is normal for you, getting a sense of what your limitations are. If anything, over the years, for me personally, my cycle has been like a teacher. And it's not a biased teacher. It is objective because it really is your body just sending you symptoms and signs. And so when I personally have had stressful situations, and let me tell you, the past few years have had their share of different stressful situations, it's always an opportunity for me to pay attention to what my body is saying. So even I was sharing this on one of our calls, but there was a period of time in 2024 where my sleep shifted. And so I'm like 41, 42, and I've never had any trouble falling asleep or anything like that. I still didn't. But there was a period of time where I was waking up after 6 hours. So it's like there was this period of time that all of a sudden I was waking up after 6 hours. And what's interesting is that if you start looking that up and you start going down the perimenopause situation, then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, I'm in my 40s. It must be perimenopause. I must have this illness, right? I must have this disease that they call perimenopause. But then when I took a step back and just applied our protocols and looked at the whole situation, it was a very, very, very stressful time. I believe it was around the time that Lily and I had released Real Food for Fertility. My daughter was quite small at that time. She must have been about 2, or maybe not even 2 yet. But yeah, I don't think she was 2 yet. So she was still very, very young. My mom had been sick. And so there was all these things that were going on, and I was traveling a lot. And then looking at historically what my cycles had been like and what my sleep had been like, looking at the actual data. So instead of kind of going crazy on the internet, I just analyzing the data, knowing everything I know, applied some of those principles to the situation. And within a few weeks, I was able to figure it out. And so this could have gone one of two ways. I could have decided that it was perimenopause and that I had this newfound illness and all of those things. But instead, I was able to really pay attention. And I guess the point that I'm making isn't that it's always going to be easy for anybody to figure this stuff out. But I suppose the point that I'm making is that charting gives you the ability to learn to speak the language of your body. And if you are charting and paying attention, and you are also making different changes and paying attention to how your body's responding to those different changes, then it becomes a much more personalized route, to the point that your body, if you are listening to it and you're open to the messages, even when sometimes they contradict what you think should be going on, or you might think, I'm doing everything right, and my body, there's something wrong with my body. If you actually are open enough to hear the messages that your body is sharing with you, it gives you an opportunity to filter out all the noise, to filter out what everybody's saying, and really ask, what is best for me? And not in the sense of I think I know in my mind what is best for me, but when you see how whatever you're doing is reflected in your actual data, it gives you the ability to cut through even some of your own preconceived notions and literally determine what is best for your body. What is it that I need to do to get my cycle to be in those normal parameters? And if your cycle falls out of those normal parameters, what you've experienced over all these years, you start to learn your limits and you start to pay attention. And I would say that is one of the most powerful messages. And it's not always the easiest for me to describe in words. I think it's easier for me to work with clients and have them chart and have them experience that. So I sometimes struggle to share in the best, most wonderful language on the podcast this experience, because that's really what it is. So behind the scenes, what happens with our clients is that they're getting to see this in real time. And not only that, but they're able to see this play out with their clients as well. Because sometimes we think, oh, this is normal for me, or that thing won't work, or I'm already doing this. But then you're seeing your cycle like not be optimal, just like time and like cycle and cycle and cycle after cycle. You're seeing like, but my luteal phase is still like 10 days, but it's like, but I'm doing everything right. But my luteal. And so what this process does is it kind of cuts through whatever you think in your mind and shows you what your body actually needs. So just to kind of iterate, I'll just kind of briefly go through my list of takeaways and then we will wrap up here. Your menstrual cycle is your most powerful diagnostic tool. Cervical mucus is still smarter than all the apps and algorithms. Ovulation is not optional. It's actually a foundational piece of overall health. Hormonal birth control, man, what a wild ride. But I guess my summary on that point is that it does have significant impacts. And also, I suppose the tide is turning about it. We seem to have made an impact, we just being the voices that have been talking about the side effects. But there does seem to be kind of this countermeasure that's trying to reduce the power of our voices around it, I guess you could say. There does seem to be some backlash from the tech giants to try to kind of suppress some of those thoughts on hormonal birth control. Underfueling, stress, and overtraining are really significant drivers of cycle disruption. Certainly seen a rise in that. Number 6, timing is so essential for conception, but I think overall the point is we always have to go back to those basics and make sure we understand those. Number 7 was about male fertility. We always have to remember that it's half of the equation, and we definitely need to keep our eye on it, especially when we're working with fertility clients. My number 8 was that cycle literacy is the missing skill in women's healthcare. There's a huge hole there, and until we fill it, what I keep seeing is that women are being underserved. Number 9, I teased the perimenopause a little bit. So like I said, to be announced, I'll have certainly more to say about that in coming years. But for now, I think that it's really helpful to focus on what the data has to say about what is really happening in this transition phase and how can we prepare our clients for the cycle changes and other changes that are normal. And how do we identify the difference between these normal changes and something that could be more problematic? And then how do we reconcile this trend for perimenopause to be considered to be an illness or disease? So don't have all the answers today, but that was the point. And then the last point that I tried to make, I don't know if it was as eloquent as it needed to be, but that our symptoms are really our body's way of telling us something. And when we learn to pay attention to those, it can be one of the most empowering tools for us to learn what is necessary for our own optimal health. With so many voices out there, if you ask 100 different people what a healthy diet is, they're going to tell you 100 different things. So charting allows you to cut through all of that and see what's actually going to work for you. So I hope that you enjoyed this takeaway, throwdown, summary of some of my ideas in 2025. I wanted to put this together for you, I guess, just to kind of go over some of the main themes. I mean, that's just how my brain works. I like to kind of summarize things and create systems and takeaways and lists, but I hope that you took something out of today's episode. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from hearing today's episode, feel free to share it. You'll find the link to share, fertilityfriday.com/605. And you can, of course, use that link to share as well. If you enjoyed today's episode, find me on social media at Fertility Friday. Tag me, send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. I hope that you had a very enjoyable and prosperous 2025. I wish you a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and Happy Holidays if you do not. And I also wish you a very blessed and prosperous new year in 2026. So I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you've been loving the podcast and you've been thinking about ways to incorporate fertility awareness into your women's health practice, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Certification Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way that you work with clients. And registration is officially open. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply today. And in the meantime, have a listen to what our practitioners have to share about their experience in the program.
The FAM program is so much more comprehensive in terms of menstrual cycle health, hormone health, and menstrual cycle foundations, charting for diagnostic reasons, charting for health reasons, monitoring your health. I gained so much more of an understanding of the physiology and nutrition, supplementation protocols. The previous programs, I didn't touch on that at all. So this was a much more comprehensive insight. Working with clients who were really struggling with their cycles, that was a massive difference that I was actually working with. For instance, someone whose periods were missing for months, and we were able to work together with this protocol to bring that back.
Transform your practice in 9 months. head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.